Hey, friends, welcome back to Your Hope-Filled Perspective. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in your God-given identity. We are in the middle of what I've called the Sacred Scar Story
Mm,
series. In
mm,
conjunction with the release of my book, Sacred Scars, Resting in God's Promise That Your Past is Not Wasted, I've had the opportunity to talk to some amazing guests who have gone through something really painful, either physically or emotionally, relationally, spiritually, or all the above. And
mhm,
what we've seen is that in the hands of a redemptive God, God can and will bring about beautiful sacred scars to show for our
mm,
pain. My guest today is no stranger to the program. She's been on the program before. It's my friend Karen DeArmond Gardner, who's a certified advocate who provides emotional support for domestic abuse survivors, walking with survivors in the aftermath of domestic abuse as they discover how to reframe what is normal and real as they process their pain and trauma, learning how to move from hopelessness to hope and from death to life through mentoring and inner healing. So I'm
mhm.
excited to welcome back Karen DeArmond Gardner. Welcome back, Karen.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be on your podcast again.
I would normally say that I'm excited to have you here, but what brings you here is a really difficult, painful life trial. So I'm not
Mhm,
excited about what you went through, but I'm
mhm,
grateful that you are willing to share out of your pain to
mhm,
encourage our listeners with hope. And frequently, what I've seen, and I know this to be true about you as well, is that some of our greatest areas of ministry comes out
mhm.
of our greatest areas of pain. So would you be willing to share with our listeners what experience have you gone through that's brought about pain and wounding, either physically,
Mhm.
emotionally, relationally, spiritually, or sometimes all the above?
Yes, I'd be happy to share. I survived a 30-year abusive marriage, and I've been out over 19 years now. And so it's easy for me to talk about because it's like you're remembering versus reliving. And there's a point in your healing where you can remember without actually reliving what has happened. And so if it sounds like, oh wow, that didn't really impact her, it's just because I have done the work that I needed to do to get to this place. But in that 30-year marriage, it was a culmination of everything. It was mostly what we call coercive control, the use of threat, the threat of violence to control, to manipulate, to gaslight, and so that you will do what he wants, when he wants, and how he wants. And through that process, and sometimes they use violence, and sometimes they just use the threat of it, and or they use a combination of that. And so often domestic abuse doesn't involve hitting. And so we think it's not, we're just in a really hard marriage. And that's somewhat what I thought. And I also had these beliefs that because as a Christian, God hates divorce, and that this is my cross. You're suffering for Jesus. And there's scriptures to back that up,
Yeah.
which turns out that is not what it meant, but I did not know that. And I didn't know I could leave. Well, why did you stay? Because I didn't know I could leave. And I was absolutely terrified of this man. He was law enforcement. I knew his capabilities. And there are so many reasons, financial reasons, emotional reasons. And honestly, it's the worst question you can ask somebody is why did you stay? When the better question would be, why would he abuse his wife? Put it back on the one that caused the harm versus the one who endured the harm. But I didn't want it to be my story. I was embarrassed by it. The shame was so powerful. And after I left, there were times my family wanted me to tell my story, and I did not want to. I was not ready. I had so much to work through. But what I did is because I was a good Christian girl, I slapped on all these Christian band-aids, and I was forgiving, because you're supposed to put it behind you, and I didn't know what to do with the pain. So nobody really wants to hear it. So bury it. And it's like putting a band-aid on a bullet wound, and you can't stop the bleeding. The pain just leaks out. And so the aftermath was almost as difficult in a different way. It was just as traumatic. Even though I was safe, it was still so unbelievably hard because back in 2005, we didn't have the resources that we do today. So there was the trauma of the abuse, and then there was aftermath of trying to heal. And people, like you say, oh, I was in an abusive marriage, and they would put on their ugly face and scrunch all up like, what's wrong with you? I'm a strong woman. That would never happen to me. And I'm like, yeah, that has nothing to do with it. Some abusers want someone who's broken, and some they like a really strong woman because they want someone they can break. And so to say it would never happen to you, we all said that. We all felt that. None of us said, oh, I want to get married to an abuser.
Talk a little bit. You mentioned the word shame. So,
Mm,
in what way did this wound, this painful experience, this devastating circumstance
hmm
hold you back and cause you to experience shame or fear, or even limit you in walking in freedom because you were a Christ follower?
hmm hmm
Yet that didn't
Yeah.
prevent the abuse.
No, it did not. And actually being a Christ follower kept me in the abuse, because, I did all the things like, praying harder and forgiving and turning the other cheek until there was no more cheeks left to turn. And so that this is your bed, you have to lie in it. So my Christianity, my belief in God actually made it worse and caused me to stay because I believe this is not what God would want, and that I would be a failure. And so when I left, shame covered me like a scratchy wool blanket, and it was visible. People could see it. I couldn't look anybody in the eye. I just caved into myself because I did not want to be seen. And over time that went away. But what it did is the shame went internal. The shame went so inside because when I realized no one wanted to hear my story, that no one could handle my pain, I just buried it all and pretended. I put up my mask, beautiful mask. Look at how much I know about the Bible. Look what a strong woman I am, what a strong Christian I am. And look what I know about the word. I'm a Bible study teacher. I love to teach the word. And so look at all that I know, and I will dazzle you with my clothes and my shoes, and so that you will not look inside, because if you did, you would run, you would push me away, you would see the absolute ugliness if I let you in. So I didn't let anybody in.
I think for some people, it's difficult to recognize shame for what it is. So,
Mm-hmm.
just real briefly, would you share some of the thoughts that you
Mm-hmm.
had that perpetuated the shame? Because the shame didn't come from God, it
Right.
always comes from the enemy who wants to defeat.
Mm-hmm.
But will you help our
Right.
listeners perhaps recognize the thoughts that prompt that shame?
And that's hard for me to look back on. When I wrote my book, I really dissected shame because I didn't think I had any, until I did a group study called Mending the Soul, and there was a chapter on shame, and I'm like, I don't have shame. And I went through the chapter and I went, oh my gosh, I have so much shame. And it sounded like what I said. I didn't want anybody to see inside of me, but I realized that shame has a look and a sound,
Mhm.
that it has a way with that we behave. And so even though we may not feel shame, it actually shows up in the way we talk about ourselves, the way we think about ourselves, what we hear from other people. They may give us a compliment, but in our mind, the shame will twist that and turn that into a negative.
Mhm.
And we can't see the shift, and then we're upset with this person and we want to push them away because the shame is saying they're untrustworthy. And so shame will always look, it will rarely look like shame. And I will add that yes, the shame comes from the enemy, and it also comes from the abuser, because the abuser does not want to carry their shame, so they heap their shame on you, and so that you carry. And how do you know? Because you kept trying to make the marriage work, you kept doing all the things, and that is part of their shame, because you are not wanting to, like, you're not like, I want to change my man. It's not, they want you. to try to change them because you will hang on. And so a lot of the shame that we carry isn't even ours.
Yeah.
And so we can do what Jesus did, because it said on the cross in Colossians that he shamed the enemy with the cross, with his death. He shamed the enemy, and we can take our shame and put it back on the abuser where it belongs. And that shame belongs to them, not us. So we can do exactly what Jesus does with that shame. And now, is this a one and done? No.
No,
It
no.
would be nice, but it's not. It's a process. Yay for processes.
Speaking of process, what was the process that God used to heal the wound and form a sacred scar using this for good?
I was seven. Well, let me put it this way: 7 years after I left, I was at a church that talked about healing a lot, and I discovered that I could heal from this. I didn't know that was possible. None of the churches I went to talked about healing. It's just like, hey, life is hard, then you die and you're in heaven. Okay, joy. And realize that that is not the end. That there is a healing that we can go through. And it started with Mending the Soul, doing that small group. And it was the first time I verbalized things out loud outside of my family. And that started me on the journey. I thought it was the end, and it was actually the beginning. And then I got into like freedom, inner healing, from what we called at the church I was going to, freedom healing, freedom ministry. It's very much like Sozo that comes out of Bethel. And then, and most of my healing has actually happened, believe it or not, since 2019, when I went into a deep season of grief for about 9 months. I had never grieved. I did healing without grief. I didn't feel the stuff. And so God used an opportunity, and he popped open that treasure box I had that was hiding all those emotions, and popped it open. And so I always recommend grieving as you heal, because if you don't want to do it how I did it was not pleasant. So I went through that season, and as I began to feel the things that I experienced, the things that I buried, that's where it really began to I don't want to say force, to propel my healing. And then I, through Heart Sync Ministry, which is another inner healing, which is just really connecting with Jesus, and it's propelled that more and more healing. Along with, I didn't do therapy, but if you can do therapy, I say therapy, because God doesn't have a cookie cutter way. It's
Right.
different for each one of us. If you could do therapy, you do that. If you like inner healing, then you do that. It's not a yes and, it's all the above. Nothing gets wasted in your healing journey. And so it's all of these things. And in that process, I encountered him. And in the process, I discovered who he truly is and who I really am.
And what I appreciate about you sharing about the importance of going through that grief, it mirrors a chapter in my book, Sacred Scars, entitled Feel It to Heal It. Because we do have to feel it, heal it,
We
and
do.
we have to be willing to take it to God and say, I
Yes.
can't do this on my own. I need you to heal it. And he will. But so often we hold on to it, either because of the shame, because we have a disordered perception of God. Sometimes comes from our early religious upbringing, but he's not going to pry our hands open.
Right.
But he's there. He says, call unto me and I will answer you.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful that you mentioned the importance of feeling it to allow healing to come. But will you share with our listeners what flipped the switch for you? In other words, how did God show you that this painful trial actually had a redemptive purpose?
Part of me knew. Interesting fact, before I left the marriage, there was a time I was separated from him, and I went and stayed with a college friend, and they were going to a Bible study, and it was on purpose-driven life. And so they were covering the one chapter, I think it was 37. She wanted me to read it, and when I read it, I just got horrified, because it said that this, exactly what you're saying, God will use what you've been through for your ministry. And I freaked out. I nearly lost my mind, because I was horrified that he would do that. And now I'm living that out. But I couldn't do it without the healing. My flip switch happened slowly over time. It wasn't like one day I just knew. He gradually led me into it, because he's not going to re-traumatize us. Like, I mean, he's been telling me since 2010, I want you to write a book. And it took me till 2018, 2019, 2020. Okay. So he started planting the idea. And I was at first like, no, I can't even write a paragraph. And you want me to write a book, 60,000 words? I can talk 60,000 words. I'm not sure I could write them. Well, I did, but it is so gracious and kind in our healing. It's Romans 2:4. It's the kindness of God. And even though it says to repentance, it would say also to our healing. It's his kindness. He is not mean and a dictator. And one of my favorite verses that I absolutely, oh gosh, I just love this. And I'm going to give you my version of it. So Isaiah 45:3, and it's God saying, speaking, and he says, I will give you treasures hidden in the darkness, secret riches. And why do I want to do this? Because I want you to know who I am, and I want you to know who you are. That word hidden, it's a place we can dwell for an indeterminate length of time. And the word darkness means everything you think, oppression and pain and all of that. In the Hebrew, it means all those things. But the very last definition of that word darkness is secret riches, because it's in the dark where Jesus, he is our treasure, right? We know that. He will meet us in those dark places whenever we step into him. And in that, we can engage with him. And through that process, we discover who God is, because the abuse, the trauma, whatever we've experienced, what it doesn't have to be domestic abuse, whatever trauma, it tells us who God is. And trauma's a liar. Trauma gets distorted. Those who harmed us, it distorts who he is. And he is so much kinder, so much more loving, so much more gentle. But yet he's a lion. He is my protector. He is my bodyguard. I am now married to a bodyguard who sometimes wants to say, oh, I don't want you to do that because I won't be there. I'm your bodyguard. And I go, oh no, my bodyguard is with me, because that's who God is. Right. And not that he's being over controlling or that, but he's a protector at heart. God is all of these things. He is not what abuse says he was. He's not the trauma that we experience, but he will gladly step into that darkness. And it's in that encounter that I've had with him that has flipped the switch, that allows me to go, I don't have to be ashamed about what I went through. It wasn't my shame. It was my abuser's shame. It was not mine.
I appreciate the fact that you're honest and will admit this is not the ministry I would have signed up for. And that is
Nope.
so true of so many people,
Mm-hmm.
either patients who have come into my private practice
Mm-hmm.
or guests that I've interviewed on your hope-filled perspective. Even my story, when I was
Mm-hmm.
raised by a mother who went through major depression, I thought that'll never happen to
Mm-hmm.
me. And then I went through it. And then God
Mm-hmm.
asked me to write a book about it. I thought I did not want to be poster child for depression. So
Right.
if you are listening and you have gone through something or are going through something right now, we don't
Mm-hmm.
want you to be filled with fear that, oh my gosh, God's going to make
Mm-mm.
me be the poster child
Mm-mm.
or
No, he
whatever.
won't.
Frequently, the sacred scar that comes out of these devastating wounds is exactly what Karen said. It's greater intimacy with God. It's
Mm-hmm.
knowing him deeper. It's understanding the fullness of his character. Not
Mm-hmm.
everybody who goes through a devastating wound is going to be called to have a ministry on
Right.
the stage or write books. So please don't
Right.
let the enemy get in your head and fill you with fear. God's purpose and plan for you is as unique and individual as you are.
Yeah.
But Karen, if a listener is resonating to some aspect of your story, and maybe their experience is different, maybe they can't relate to domestic abuse, but they can relate to kind of being hidden or
Mm-hmm.
being filled with shame over a life circumstance,
Mm-hmm.
what hope-filled perspective would you want to leave them with today?
It is that God doesn't leave us hanging where we are, that it's a matter of, recognizing that there is shame there, or that we're angry, because we don't want to admit that as Christians. We don't want to admit that we're angry, and anger is part of the grieving process. If you skip it, you're not getting all that you need, that your frustration and that pain, that God wants to walk you through that process of healing, and he will begin to open doors, because he does not want to leave us in hopelessness. What I love is the story is in Ezekiel 34, when God is really angry at the shepherds who let their sheep just wander off. They were abusive, they were controlling, they were taking advantage of the vulnerable. And God finally says, fine, I will go after my sheep. And then here comes Jesus, how many thousands of years later? Here comes Jesus telling us the story of leaving the 99 and going after the one and saying, my sheep will hear my voice. Those are promises that we can hang on to. Even if you're a little angry at him, I'm just telling you, or a lot, he can handle that anger. That is not wrong to be angry. I'm concerned when someone isn't angry for a time. It's not where you want to live forever, but it is a necessary process because the anger tells us there's something else going on. It's not the primary emotion. It's the secondary. There's a reason it's there. Same with shame. There's something behind that. And God wants to get to the root of what that is so that you can walk in hope and in life and live, not just survive.
And thrive.
Yeah.
Thrive, not just survive. Karen,
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful for you using your sacred scars
Mm-hmm.
to provide hope and encouragement. If a listener would like to learn more about you or your ministry or your book, where's the best place for them to find you?
I'm on social media on Facebook under Another One Free. It's where I post about domestic abuse. I'm also on Instagram under my name, Karen DeArmond Gardner. And my book is available everywhere. It's on Amazon and it's also Barnes and Noble. Pick a place where you like to buy books. It is pretty much anywhere that you like to buy books. And I will also tell you, this is a plug, not that we're looking for reviews, but when we find a book that it's helped us, when we write a review, it actually gets it into the hands of more people. They will post it more and suggest it to people. And I have a hard time asking for reviews, but as an author, it's really important, not for just me, but for Michelle and her book, that it helps more people see it that maybe won't find the book otherwise. And so I'm just putting in a shameless plug, which I don't ever do because it's really not about me or you. It's about the people that need our book and what we're writing. And so we're always grateful. And so I also have a website, Another One Free, and you could sign up for a newsletter, monthly newsletter. I don't spam you. But if you are someone that's in domestic abuse, or you've come out and you're still struggling, whether you left yesterday or 20 years ago, you can reach me at that website or at Karen at anotherOneFree.com if you want to email me.
Karen, thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's going to encourage many of our listeners. And listeners, I will put all the information about Karen, her website, her resources, her books on the show notes that you can find at drmichelleb.com. It's really my hope that through this series, that whatever you have gone through or whatever you are going through now, that you find hope, encouragement that's grounded in a biblically based, hope-filled perspective. And maybe you are fortunate that right now you're not going through a painful experience. Praise the Lord for that. But you know someone who is. So consider sharing the resources and this podcast for friends and family who need a hope-filled perspective. Friends, we've got more Sacred Scar stories to share with you. So until we meet again next week, may you have a hope-filled week.